Right then, I'm going to do a video on how to change a turbo on a Peugeot 306 turbo diesel. Kind of applies to any car with the XUD block in it though, really. The reason I'm actually changing it is because, well, I'm upgrading it, but it's actually already upgraded to a KO3, and it turns out that the KO3 was sold to me by a bit of an idiot, so it's knackered. So I'm going to have to change it again, so I'm going to put one of my G215s on because I got a couple. Anyway, first thing you want to do is get the car jacked up, because you need to get under it later to undo some, so you want to get it jacked up in the first place so that when you start dropping the engine and stuff it doesn't matter. Get it jacked up, make sure you check the back wheels etc first, and then once you get them, then obviously open your bonnet, and first thing you want to do is take like the intercooler and stuff off if your engine's standard. I haven't actually got an intercooler on top of my engine, but you will probably have one there. All you got to do is undo the two bolts in the back on top of there. There's one more over on the left. Take the Juba clip off your boost hose off, and sometimes you might have still got the bolts in the front, one in there, one in there, little 10mm bolts. And you've got a little boost compensator hose, and you can pull the intercooler off. The next thing you want to do is take the engine off the mount, basically. So I'll just remove my intercooler bolts a minute. Okay, so I've taken all my intercooler pipes off now, so that's pretty much how yours would look after you've taken the intercooler off. I mean, there's a few pipes and things that are different, but apart from that, that's what you're going to be looking at. The next thing you want to do is drop the engine off the mount. The reason we can do that is because basically, like all XU engines, they kind of lie back at sort of an angle like that, just to try and fit it in the engine bay, which has the annoying consequence of there being absolutely no room down the back of the engine, which, as you probably know, is where the turbo is. So what we're going to do is take off this engine mount and lower the engine down on a trolley jack, which as it goes down it will come forwards and it will give you more room back behind. I do this to do a lot of jobs on these things because it's just so fiddly otherwise. So it's nice, it literally takes 2 minutes because it's basically 4 bolts and a jack, and you can let it down. So first thing you want to do is get a jack underneath the sump. Well, if you want to be safe, I suppose you can use a bit of wood or something, although in fairness I always just put a jack straight under the sump and it won't cause you any problems. Just be careful that you don't jack it up or anything and put a dent in the sump basically, but if you want to be safe then just use like a bit of wood or something just to spread the weight across the bottom of the sump. Right, I've got a jack underneath the bottom of the sump now. I've just jacked it up very slightly just so you're taking a little bit of weight off the mount. Now to get the mount off, first we've got to take this little, there's like a little strut brace thing across the top of the engine mount. So there's two 30mm nuts, undo them and that little bracket comes off. Then if you take these there's 4 nuts, there's 3 on the engine side of the engine mount and 1 on there. They're all 16mm. If you take the one off the engine first, take that one right off. In fact, you might have got a little thing on top, like a rubber thing that helps support the engine mount. You probably need to use a big adjustable spanner. Take that off first, then take the nut off. Then you can undo these bolts, sort of undo them evenly, and then I'll show you in a second. I've taken that little cross support I was talking about off. Now you can see that big rubbery thing. If you put an adjustable spanner and take that off, then undo that 16mm nut, then undo these evenly and until you've got them all off. Now, I've undone those bolts all around the engine mount now. Now what you've got to do is lift it off, but it probably won't just lift straight off. You'll just need to just grab hold of the engine, just wiggle it forward and backwards slightly, and then just lift it up. Chris, hold that. Good job, Chris has just popped in with this piece of shit, brand new laptop, waste of time. But he can hold the camera while he's here. Right, so you grab hold the engine there. Oh, I'll take that fuel hose because that's just going to be in the way. Back of the engine, drops off like that. Then you just leave it there. Let the jack down slightly, watch it as you go, just let it down, you see the engine go down and forwards at the same time like that. Next thing to do is take off your air intake ducting stuff. Usually go down to your air box, mine are slightly different, but you just need to undo a couple of jubilees, then undo one of these two here and then you can pull that bit out. You'll probably have a breather hose to disconnect as well, which I haven't, but that one there just pops off either end, probably take it off this end to get the pipe out of the way as well. Okay, I've taken that pipe off now. Another thing I'm going to get out of the way is this brake vacuum tube, so just undo the tube clip at this end, and as long as you haven't got any other things teed into it like I had, then you just pull that off and yank that over. Don't bother disconnecting it the other side, just put it out of the way somewhere. Okay, the next thing to remove is the boost hose that went to the intercooler. That comes down through the inlet manifold. It's just one Jubilee clip on the top of the turbo. If you go in with a 7mm from here, undo the Jubilee clip, and then pull it out from the top, and take the clip off and put it somewhere safe because it'll only fool someone and you won't be able to find it later. Okay, well, it's a bit, you can do whatever you want next really. Either you unbolt the inlet manifold, or I like to take off this induction pipe now, because it just gets in the way when you're trying to get to the manifold bolts and stuff. So that's just it goes down and in and around. Then it's like a rubber joint that goes between the side of the turbo and that. It's just like a rubber joint with a tubule on each side. Undo either, usually one. Even though it'd be more sensible to undo that side because you can get it all off. You usually can't reach it, so undo the one this side. The easiest way is either in the back, depending on which way the jubilee is looking. If it's looking up, you can go down in here. If it's looking down, go in the wheel arch, and you can stick your hand up in there, idea with a 7mm socket. Undo that one, then pull that off. Okay, that pipe's off now. Just gives you that extra bit of room. Right, the next thing you want to take off is your inlet manifold. That's held on by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bolts. They seem to change the way that they actually bolted these on through the phases. You'll either have bolts, just normal bolts going in there, which will either have a 30mm head on the end or an Allen key. One I've seen everything. But the most common thing you'll have is studs, like on exhaust studs, with a nut on the end. So that's what I've got in this one, and there'll be 30mm nuts. So what you want to do is go along and undo all my nuts first. Take all my nuts off, and then you can try take it, depending on what turbo you've got to start with. You might be able to get the inlet off at this point, and if you can, brilliant, because it can make the rest of the process so much easier. But it probably won't, because it usually catches on the turbo. So what you've got to do is take all of the inlet nuts off, then take all of the exhaust nuts off. That's the same system with studs. But when you take the exhaust studs off, watch it, because there's a big spacer behind them, so take them off as well. And then if you let the turbo drop back a bit, that will then usually be enough to get the inlet off. If it's not, you have to extract the studs. Now to get the studs out of the head, then what I do is you get two 13mm nuts. Best find some other ones rather than the ones that hold it on, because they've got built-in washers and it's not really enough room. If you screw one nut on, then screw another nut on right behind it, then get two spanners and tighten the two nuts into each other. Then just put like a socket or something over the end, and then that, because the two lock nuts are locked together and they're locked to the shaft, it will undo the what do you call it, belly bolt out of the head. So, and if you extract them all, then you can lift the manifold straight out. Now, as I've already changed my manifold, as it turns out, I went from one with EGR to one without, because EGR sucks. Just so you can see, that's where the bolts are. So you've got 1, 2, and you've got 3 in the middle here, and then the same 1, 2 on that side. That bottom one there is a bit fiddly, but that won't ever be a stud. I've never seen it before. It's always a little 30mm nut, like that. Also, to get it off, if you've got EGR, which this one did, as you can see there, there's a metal pipe that runs between there and the exhaust. That one there. You just need to unclip that, get a screwdriver in behind the clip if you've got a screwdriver clip, or there might be a Allen key adjustable clip. They seem to use both. So you just undo that, and then you'll be able to remove that from the back of the engine by lifting upwards. If you haven't got a new gasket, which, to be honest, if I'm taking this apart, I would recommend you change, because for the sake of like a tenner, it's stupid not to. But if you're too tight, like some farmers like me, then just be careful when you pull it off, because you might split the gasket, and then you're definitely going to need a new one. Okay, I've just taken off the 13mm nuts on the inlet manifold. As you can see, it's loose now. As you can see, it slides forward and back at a certain bit, but then it's catching on the top of the turbo. This is what usually happens. So if I now loosen all the nuts and take them off the exhaust manifold, that's those spacers I was talking about. They're on the exhaust manifold, and thank God they're rare, really, because otherwise you would have a hell of a job getting into where the bolts are. So I've undone them, and just with a little bit of leverage you can just force the turbo manifold just off its sliders a little bit. Once you've gone back far enough, the intake manifold will come out. As you can see, mine's pretty shagged, so I'll be getting a new one. Now that that's off, the best thing, because to get the turbo out you need to extract all of the studs in the back, because trying to get that turbo out of there when you've got studs sticking out everywhere is a real pain. So you want to do all the inlet ones and all the exhaust ones. Sorry, actually I don't usually do the little short, because the very two end ones on the inlet are shorter than the rest. I usually do leave them in, but all the others you want to double nut and unscrew and take out. That's what I meant by double studding. They just got two nuts like that and lock them together and then undo it like that, and you can take them out. Another useful little tip, not that you can really see anything, but when you take all the studs out, if you just, before you start taking the exhaust studs out, if you put one of the spacers and nuts back on and just do it up finger tight, so but the exhaust is sitting back up against the head. Just takes a strain, otherwise it's sitting at an angle and pinching on all the other studs. So if you just do one back up again, it takes the weight off the others and then undo a lot more easily. Then just take that one out at the end. Right, before you take the last stud out, the next thing I'm going to do is disconnect the exhaust and the oil lines. For the exhaust, on the down pipe, which you can barely see because of the light, but you just about see it there, which connects to the exhaust, there's two bolts with like spring-loaded washers and nuts on them. It's 10mm. Just undo the nuts on the back, and when you take the nuts off, just be careful you don't lose the nut and then the spring and the washer thing. Take all that out and just screw it all back together so you won't lose it all, and put it in a tray somewhere. And for the oil lines, you need to get underneath the car to do the underneath bit I would first. Underneath you've got the return line, which is a rubber flexi hose with two jubilee clips. I would undo the two jubilees and take the pipe out completely so it's out of the way. Then underneath you need to undo with the 17mm spanner the high pressure feed from the engine block. And then you need to come on top and undo this pipe from up there, and you can remove them completely. Okay, we are now under the car and you can't see anything, so I'm going to take a photo with my finger pointing, hopefully. Okay, so they're the two hoses we just removed. That's that low pressure return I was talking about, the two jubilees. That's the high pressure one with the 17mm nuts at each end. Now that you've got your oil lines and your exhaust disconnected, there's nothing actually holding the turbo in the car, at least there shouldn't be. The only thing I didn't mention is that high pressure oil feed on the T2 and K14 sometimes, for some reason they decided that needed extra strength, and there's a little 8mm nut that holds like a little bracket that just holds the oil line to the engine, which you can access from underneath. It's a little bit fiddly, but an 8mm socket can undo that if you've got that. A lot of them don't seem to have it. I don't know why some do and some don't, but it's French, so anything could be happened. To get that out then, you try lifting it up through, but it probably won't fit. What I usually do is just disconnect this heater matrix pipe from the back of the head. You'll get a load of water run out the head, so you'll need to bleed the coolant through afterwards. But if you just disconnect that, then you can pull it up through here and it's a bit easier. There you have it. Turbo is out. Now, I can't be asked to do anything else today, so I'll continue this video tomorrow. Right then, before putting the new turbo etc on, like I said earlier, I want to get hold of a new gasket. This one's a steel one, sometimes the steel, sometimes the material. Doesn't really make much difference. Don't use gasket sealant as well as the thing, there's no point, just put the raw gasket on and it'll be fine. Before you put the gasket on, before you put it back on, you want to make sure you sort of clean the back of the head and just clean around the ports so they're back nice and flat, because you don't want it to be uneven because you might get leaks, particularly to pay attention on the intake one, because that's the one you don't want leaking because that one's under boost pressure. Okay, I've now put the new GT15 down the back of the engine in position. I wanted another K3, but they're pretty impossible to get hold of, and for what the gains are worth I can't actually see it's worth it. So I'm going back to GT15 again. Well, that's what I had in the workshop, so I'm putting one of those on, because I used to have a T2 on it, which is quite laggy. Anyway, I've dropped the turbo down behind the engine now. Another thing to notice, which you probably can't see, but that bit there is where the EGR, like takeoff valve usually thing is. I've taken that off completely and welded a plate over it, because you'll find that the EGR thing on the GT15 gets completely in the way of the intake manifold and it will absolutely drive you up the wall. Plus EGR is a complete waste of time anyway, so get rid of it, that's awesome. So what I want to do is drop the turbo back behind the engine and put all the studs back in exactly the same way as you took them out. Once the studs are in, bolt the turbo back, and then you can remount the exhaust same as you took it off, put the oil lines back on. Just be careful you don't cross thread them. What you want to do is just catch each end before you tighten them. Don't go tightening one and then trying to catch the other end, because you'll bump in and move it. So catch that. Okay, now I've put the exhaust back on, I've put the oil lines on, and obviously all the bolts are tightened up. So the next thing to do is put the inlet manifold back on. Pretty much the reverse procedure to how you took it off. Once you've got the inlet on, just be able to put your air tube back on, catch your vacuum hose, put the engine back on its mount by jacking it up, dropping it on. You have to wiggle it around a bit, and just put everything else that you took off back on, really. And then when you first start up with a new turbo, you want to start the engine and just let it idle for like 5 minutes, get some oil circulation through the turbo. because obviously that's full of air and you don't want to go letting it spool up before it's got good oil. If you haven't changed your oil for a while, it's probably a good idea to just get your oil changed anyway. Give your turbo a decent start. And apart from that, you should be good.